Slideshow. There we go. René Descartes, Meditations on a First Philosophy. So, René Descartes, of course, was a very famous philosopher, or is a very famous philosopher. I think he might have been better known for his science and mathematics when he was actually alive. No, he was also recognized for his philosophy as well. But he primarily thought of himself as a scientist. René Descartes lived from 1596 to 1650. This is, I think, one of my favorite portraits of him. It was said to have been painted in one of the studios of the Dutch grandmasters. Not by a Dutch grandmaster, but, in the style and in the studio of. Though clearly, yeah, definitely has influence. So, probably, I think, one of the ones that gets closest to what he actually looked like. Okay, philosopher, scientist, mathematician, and sometimes soldier. He was born in France, unsurprisingly. His father, I believe, was an official and also a lawyer. His mother died when he was very young, and he was sent off to school at La Flèche. It was a Jesuit college, and his uncle was in charge of that college, and that's where he got, the bulk of his education as he saw it. He rejected a lot of what he learned there and tried to replace it with his own philosophy. And I say tried because, he did succeed, but the Jesuits at La Flèche were never persuaded, much to his chagrin. He also studied law, however, never practiced a day as a lawyer. We're going to see several philosophers for whom that's true. He served as a soldier, really a mercenary, musketman, I think, for Prince of Nassau. We're not sure that he ever actually saw action or took a shot. It is rumored, however, that he wrote a book about fencing and dueling, but it's been lost to history. One of the things that Descartes is very famous for, or maybe not as famous for, is his modeling, his explanation of why the rainbow has the shape that it does. And he recognized, of course, that it's really a circle, right? You're only seeing half of a circle based on your position in the horizon. And this right here is an idealized drop of water, and by going through, showing how the light bounced through the drop of water and came upon, here's our observer right here, that this results in this particular arc. There's another model I think he also designed, based on, it's called Descartes' ray, which he, sorry about that, he anticipated the, we all know that there's a secondary rainbow. He also explained the secondary rainbow. He also explained, anticipated a tertiary rainbow and a quaternary rainbow using mathematics. And the quaternary, I think, was only photographed in the last 6-7 years. Anyway, he did a lot of good work in optics, as a scientist. This is a picture of Descartes' ray. I'm going to forward a link to a text to you, or a copy of the text that describes just rainbow science in general, and I think a little bit about Descartes' role in it. But it's just fascinating to know it. You may read it or not as you wish. The other thing that Descartes invented was this thing. if we were in class right now, I'd ask you what that is. It is a Cartesian plane, a Cartesian coordinate system. This little thing made it possible for us to connect analytic geometry, or rather, it helped us to create analytic geometry and connect algebra and geometry mathematically. They were, two completely separate enterprises, and they couldn't get the math to bridge over from one to the other. But using the Cartesian coordinate system, they could. The story they tell about this is great. So as a young child, it was said that he was rather sickly. He had what they called a weak chest, which meant that he was particularly prone to maybe upper respiratory infections, or asthma, or what have you. La rhume. But while to compensate for this, try and help him be a bit more robust, he was allowed to sleep as late as he wanted to. At least at La Flèche. And, throughout most of his life, really, if not all, except for at the end of his life, he was teaching Queen Christina of Sweden. And she liked to start her lessons very early, like around 5 in the morning. And he died shortly after coming to work for her in Sweden. And the argument is, that getting up early in the morning is what killed him. If you think about it, getting to sleep in every morning as late as you want to is pretty unheard of. Not even children really get to do that. Oh, so he was allowed to sleep as late as he wanted to. And then he describes coming up with a Cartesian plane, Cartesian, named after Descartes, of course. He was spending one of these mornings in bed, and he was looking up at the ceiling, lying on his back, looking up at the ceiling. And there was a fly crawling around on the ceiling. And he thought, how would I tell somebody else what path that fly took? So he came up with this kind of way of describing how things can move in space. So this is a real fundamental, important thing that Descartes has contributed to us. Okay, his overarching project was to construct a universal science, like just have a theory of everything to explain how the universe works. And he wanted it to possess the certainty of mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4. No matter where you are, no matter what time you are, if you're on Mars or if you're on Jupiter, it's true forever and ever and always, and doesn't matter, where you are. Science does not, empirical science does not possess the certainty of mathematics for other reasons. It's an inductive process of investigation, as opposed to mathematics, which is a deductive process of investigation. We'll look at that maybe a little bit later when we look at David Hume. Induction, though, is when you're taking a specific and you're trying to generalize from the few to the larger picture. And usually in deduction, what you're doing is you have a large mass of information, and you're trying to determine whether or not one fact is itself true, related to all these other ideas. And it doesn't give you as big a result. But anyway, we'll get back to that. You don't get more information, basically, from the conclusion in a deductive argument the way that you do in an inductive argument. So, this is something I want you to know. Descartes' aim was to construct a universal science possessing the certainty of mathematics by reasoning from a few premises, clearly and distinctly apprehended. Clearly and distinctly for Descartes are terms that he uses to describe ideas that cannot be false. Something that can be seen clearly cannot be mistaken for something else. Oh, something that you can see clearly is something you cannot deny to be the case. And something that is distinct, you can't confuse it for anything else. An example that's commonly given is the toothache. The toothache can be clear but not distinct. So you know that your mouth hurts, right? And it's more or less in the vicinity of this tooth. You cannot deny that your tooth hurts. Maybe you can deny it to other people, but you can't deny it to yourself. However, it might be the case that the pain that you're experiencing is not, in fact, the tooth that you think it is. It's the tooth next to it, and you're experiencing transferred pain. It could be your sinuses. It could be a lot of other things. So it's not distinct. It could be the case that we're mistaking something else for tooth pain. So we'll see some of this project when we get into this first meditation. Okay. So this is kind of his overarching project. He was fairly successful. He did have a model for how particles interacted. And there was no space in his vision of the universe at the micro level. It was just all these little vortices, these little whirling things that interacted with other things by basically, whirling against them and pushing them against each other and so on. I guess, what is that game? Beyblade. I guess they're like a, universal game of Beyblade. It seems rather absurd to us now, but it was, in fact, the dominant theory for quite some time. Okay. Another thing to understand about Descartes, and this is part of what he's really up to in the Meditations itself, and it's just kind of worth noting. There was this guy. His name was Giordano Bruno. He lived from 1548 to 1600. He was a monk. He believed, I think he was Benedictine? I think so. He believed that the sun is at the center of the universe, which at this time was still quite unacceptable. He also believed, and this is pretty profound, that the sun is just another star. When he looks out to the heavens and he sees, glimmers of light off in the distance, the stars, to him he is seeing other suns. And like our sun, with its planet and the life of us on it, these other suns had planets in Giordano Bruno's mind, and intelligent life lived on other planets throughout the universe. He was burned at the stake in 1600 as a result of these views. A great deal of heresy is also associated with him, and it's not entirely clear, how much of his condemnation was from heresy or from his, sort of radical views of the universe. But he was tortured as well. There is a statue to him, I believe, I want to say in Florence, Milan. He's considered to be a martyr to science sometimes. But what's really interesting when people tell the story about Giordano Bruno, and he actually went so far as he traveled to England and talked to people there about his heretical views of the universe. There's one thing that often gets missed, which is that he was a master of memory. You could give him any list of things or numbers or books or what have you, and he could memorize them, where what the order of the numbers were, of course, what the letters are, where things are. He could memorize the list of something pretty profoundly. He had actually, this was the wheel. This is his sort of written tool that he used to, or he said he used, to keep track of his different lists. I guess clearly he associated his, the ideas of the numbers of things with these different squares, and was able to reconstruct from his memory whatever it was that he had been told to memorize. And I think this is really why he was popular amongst at least the court in England. It had nothing to do with, I don't think, with this heresy, but this trick is pretty powerful. I do not know how this one works at all, and I'm not sure anybody really does. But worth studying. So, Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600. He was promoting Copernican views, or the heliocentric model of the universe, which is that the sun is at the center of the solar system, and the Earth and the other planets and the moons move around the sun. Copernicus was was he a monk? I think he was a monk, and he didn't publish until after he died that the sun is at the center of the universe, because it was such a really radical idea. Galileo Galilei, y'all should know him a little bit from history of science and history in general. Schmatt guy did experiments. He thought we should quantify the information that we obtain using, we should use mathematics to measure and get the most reliable scientific results that we can. He was not the inventor of the telescope. However, he was the one that turned it onto the heavens and shattered the perfection of the crystal spheres. There was a vision of the universe at that time that, there were in different crystalline spheres, one inside the other, that corresponded to the orbit of a particular planet. This is why comets were so bizarre, because they were completely outside of the ongoing perfect pattern of the skies and the stars. So anyway, Galileo Galilei published a motu, which talked about the heliocentric model of the universe as fact, and he wound up being put under house arrest as a result. And what's interesting is that at the same time right as he was put under house arrest, and the word got back to Descartes that Galileo was under house arrest, he was getting ready to publish his major work in science, Du Monde. And as a consequence of Galileo being held in house arrest, he chose not to publish his major scientific work. What he did do later, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, is the book that was on the Vatican's not to be read list for well into the 20th century, I think. I think at some point, though, they just, ignored it. But, Descartes would have been aware of Giordano Bruno and his beliefs and getting burned at the stake, and Galileo Galilei being put under house arrest for this vision of the universe, which Descartes himself shared. So, another one of his major goals is to separate science from religion, such that scientists can go on and do their things and investigate the nature of the universe and not have to worry about the church looking over their shoulder and getting ready to burn them for heresy if they find something out about the universe, or they think they find something out that is contrary to the way that the church thinks it is. So, France was not very forgiving as a Catholic state, not very tolerant, so he moved to the Netherlands, spent a lot of time in Amsterdam. Actually, he traveled and moved all over the Netherlands, and he would stay in one place for a little while until the neighbors started kind of getting iffy, and then he would move again. They were tolerant, but only to a point. And I think he was fearful, is the other reason. He separates the soul and mind, which he thought of as being a single thing, from the body into different substances. And we'll get back to this idea when we look at mind-body dualism. He has a way of separating the soul from the physical body. He says the soul is immaterial. It doesn't take up space. It's utterly ethereal, but the body, definitely is solid and follows physical laws and takes up space. And he said, the church should dedicate itself to exploring the soul and the mind, right? That's their purview. And let the scientists work on the dull dirt of the universe. So, church has dominion over the study of the soul, and science over study of the world. He was also rejecting a particular philosophy called scholasticism, which was a medieval philosophy. He's considered to be the first modern philosopher, but really a lot of what he's doing is responding to medieval philosophy, which was I'm thinking about how to describe its relationship with Aristotle. It was Aristotelianism, but it was kind of limited and plodding. Thomas Aquinas is considered to be like the greatest of the scholastics. And he was taught, René Descartes was taught scholasticism at La Flèche, and he spends the rest of his life trying to compensate, trying to come up with an alternative theory to scholasticism that will be more acceptable. He never did convince, though, his teachers at La Flèche. I think he thought that was one of his major failings. He also rejected the primacy of sensory information. And this is contrary to scholasticism, which was kind of like a crude empiricism. And he believed that we could come to know things in the world with a certain amount, with certainty, from the mind alone, in some sense. But he also believed in observation as well. But he believed that we know the mind better than we know the body. We get the most truth from our thoughts and our thinking, and not directly from the world itself. So the primacy of sin-free information was, in fact, scholasticism as the official philosophy of the Catholic Church. Scholasticism promoting a view that's dependent upon sort of sensory information, or qualia, or qualities that substances have to have. But we'll get a little bit more into that in a minute. And of course, the fate of Giordano Bruno. All of this, informed him about the idea of that we really need to make science safe from religion. I don't know that he succeeded. Oh, here we go. Rejection of scholasticism. Scholasticism, the medieval philosophy, a Christianized version of Aristotle. Here's one of the things that he wanted to get away from in science. Aristotle attributed the action of both animate and inanimate objects to causes that were internal to the objects. So instead of, the ball rolls downhill, there is an inner force within the ball, a cause that makes it go to its proper place in the universe, which is downhill. Water, wants to go to the place where it belongs, so it flows downhill. Gas moves up in the sky because they have this inclination, like a described desire or motivation. Just the way that we would talk about, an animal or a human being wanting to do something, that they have a goal. The man walks downhill to get to the creek. Water flows downhill, to get to its proper place in the universe. And it's attributing, using this language that sort of attributes agency, right? The ability to choose actions and to act on inanimate objects. And even animals in a way that they weren't too kosher with, or did not think was a good idea. This is from a medieval manuscript. I think it's at the Frick Library in Pittsburgh. And it's a depiction of the medieval view of the universe. Of course, we have, up at the very top, we have the heavens with, I think, Jesus, and I think Mary is being crowned there. Various, saints and angels at the very, top of the world. Below that is the stars. There's a layer of stars. And then I believe this is from top to bottom: Mars, Venus, Jupiter, the sun. Maybe that's Venus. I don't know. They knew about a few planets. They knew about Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And they might have known about Mercury. Anyway, and so all of these are just basically orbits that go around the Earth, and the moon is as close as it can get to the Earth, and below the moon is a layer of fire. This is why fire always goes up, right? And it's always trying to reach the sky because that's its natural place. In this hierarchy. And beneath that we have, our ordinary world of water and dirt and air. Here's air right up in the top of this world here, and water and earth at the bottom. So this was their vision, their cosmology. But this the sun had an inclination to move in a particular direction, and it was just attributing agency to inanimate objects that kind of got on Descartes' nerves, because no, the sun does what the sun does because it is the sun and it follows laws, the laws of nature. Okay, so this gets us up to the first meditation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this particular book, and then I think I'm going to pause, stop this particular lecture. All right, so Meditations on a First Philosophy. Now, the copy I asked you to get only has the meditations in it. But when René Descartes originally published his Meditations on a First Philosophy, before he published it, he sent copies out to a lot of his philosopher friends and asked them for their opinions about his work. And they wrote back to him saying, "Oh, well, you got this problem, you got that problem." I think Gassendi and Hobbes and Elizabeth of Bavaria, Thomas Hobbes, yeah, too. And he published their responses to his philosophy, basically their problems with the meditations, in the back of the same book, which to me seems to be, very honest. And he also wrote his own responses to their things, and those are also in the back of the same book. So there you have it. The introduction to this book is very helpful. Does a nice job of describing his life. And we get introductions by Descartes himself. To those most wise and distinguished men, the dean and doctors of the faculty of sacred theology of Paris, René Descartes sends greetings. So this particular work is written in part to do this thing of separating science from religion. Want to read one line, then I'll move on. For although it suffices for us believers to believe by faith that the human soul does not die with the body, and that God exists, certainly no unbelievers seem capable of being persuaded of any religion or even of almost any moral virtue until these two are first proven to them by natural reason. Okay. So he talks about the difficulty of trying to persuade the unbeliever here. But, so it's interesting. And then he writes his own preface to the reader. We get a synopsis. Meditations on First Philosophy, in which the existence of God and the distinction between the soul and the body are demonstrated. So, meditation 1. Each one of these meditations was supposed to represent sort of a day of thought, dedicated entirely to thought. And I think it's worthwhile to kind of think of it that way, that try to follow a little bit of what he said he was up to. Of course, it took him years to write it, but he talks about sitting down in his chair and putting aside other ideas to finally, wrestle with what he thinks needs to be done. And concerning those things that can be called into doubt. Okay, he's going to use doubt as a means of getting at the truth, called hyperbolic or sometimes Cartesian doubt. But I think this is a good place to take a break in this lecture and carry on the first meditation itself in another one.